I think now's a good time to begin. Thank you again for joining our Factual Accuracy Comments Masterclass. Good morning, everyone. I am Gemma Nicholas, Associate Solicitor at Ridouts, and I have with me my colleague, Oliver Brown, Trainee Solicitor. Thanks again for joining us. We hope that you learn a lot from this session. It's on submitting robust and effective factual accuracy comment submissions against draft CQC inspection reports. Just to let you know, slides and a recording will be circulated afterwards. We have quite a lot to get through, so what I'll do is hand over to Oliver, who will be able to go through what we're going to cover today.
Thanks,
on the next slide.
Hello everyone, welcome. So today we're going to cover 7 sections. There will be an opportunity for a Q&A at the end. So if you think you have a question throughout the presentation, just don't hesitate to pop it in the chat and we'll choose some questions at the end. The last section of this will have some interactive exercises which will demonstrate and visually show you certain skills that you'd need to have a successful and robust factual accuracy comment. So I hope you all enjoy, and I'll pass back to Gemma now for the start.
Okay, so the first section is on preparing for an inspection. So on the next slide, we'll just cover what you need to do to prepare for an inspection. Firstly, it's worth familiarising yourself with CQC guidance. The first guidance that is worth noting is how CQC monitors, inspects and regulates adult social care services. Now, this guidance sets out how CQC monitors through data collection, and the guidance explains the inspection process and how CQC aggregates ratings and the factual accuracy process itself. Another guidance document, which you are most likely already familiar with, is the guidance for providers on meeting the regulations. This guidance sets out factors that providers must have regard to in order to meet the regulated activities regulations and the registration regulations. Now, it's a lengthy document, 106 pages in total, but it is a key document which you should be referring to always. On the next slide, what's also helpful is reviewing the CQC's brief guides for inspection teams, which is on the CQC website. And there are quite a few. They cover specific topics. Some of the topics that they cover include restraint and covert medication. Now, they set out how the inspection team should gather evidence and report their findings, as well as giving information on the regulations. The report writing guidance is CQC's internal guidance, which you would need to obtain through a Freedom of Information Act request. It is a detailed guidance note for inspectors on how to write inspection reports. It gives you some insight into the process as well. In preparation for an inspection, it is important that you complete your provider information return. And as you know, you'll have 4 weeks to complete and submit it. Note that if you fail to submit it on time, this will count against you when CQC come to aggregate your rating. Now, on the next slide, what's really important is that you challenge your own systems as part of quality assurance, and you check for any weaknesses against the CQC's key lines of inquiries and prompts. So it's advisable that you audit your documentation across your service. This includes care plans, risk assessments and daily records, which should all be joined up and basically demonstrate that safe care is being delivered. Check for gaps. Know where your documents are. That's a key thing that we've noticed with providers not necessarily knowing exactly where documents are, especially if they've gone through a transition from electronic to, from paper-based to an electronic system. So if you do have documents in both formats, make sure you know where those documents are. Also consider getting an independent pair of eyes to come in and assess the compliance against the fundamental standards. So there are a range of consultants out there that can support you through the preparation phase, so in terms of preparing for inspections. So as you can see on this slide, brief your staff on what to expect from a CQC inspection. So staff do get nervous, so it is important that you have conversations with staff. Obviously, an inspection most likely is not announced prior. However, it then establishes the point that you need to have conversations with staff regularly on the prospect of being inspected by the CQC. Also think about the culture of your service. You want to avoid staff using the inspection as an opportunity to whistleblow. So really, there should be no surprises from staff when CQC inspect. Ensure you have a registered manager. We note that that's not always easy, especially in the current climate where recruitment is an issue. Or at the very least, show that you are taking active steps to get a registered manager in place if you don't have one, because it is a rating limiter as well. And lastly, be aware of CQC's current hot topics. So this will allow you to know which areas to focus on and pay particular attention to. So on the next slide, the first hot topic is CQC inspector conduct. And this we have seen with the CQC's move to risk-based inspection. So we have seen that the CQC inspectors come in to inspect with quite an abrasive and hostile attitude, looking for problems and not really giving providers a fair chance to show all the positives. So what we see is that the inspectors come in and they look to identify problems and to evidence any negative views that they've possibly already formed, or any kind of whistleblowing that they've received. So there's a failure for them to properly consider positive evidence that contradicts any negative view. The second hot topic is agency workers. And this is always a hot topic in terms of staffing, but really and truly, agency workers should be treated as no different to permanent staff, especially if they are trained. What you can do to combat any criticism possibly is to book agency workers to ensure that they work in the service regularly and that they know the service well and they build a rapport with your residents. Another hot topic is whistleblowing. So whistleblowing in the care sector is basically the term used when someone raises concerns about poor practice or wrongdoings which cause harm or risk of harm to service users, colleagues, or the wider public. Have a whistleblowing policy in place, but also an open door policy does help, whereby staff can raise concerns with the service in the first instance. So whistleblowing really should be a last resort. And fire safety is the next hot topic. CQC often criticise providers for failing to mitigate against fire risks. So what you need to do is demonstrate compliance by reviewing emergency evacuation procedures, conducting regular fire drills and testing fire safety equipment. So these are your alarms, emergency lighting, external staircases, etc. And as the final hot topic is record keeping. And that is always a hot topic in the fact that records are the main source of evidence that the CQC relies on during inspections. So you need to ensure that your records are complete, legible, accurate, and up to date.
Okay, thanks for that, Gemma. I'm just going to talk about what to do during the inspection. So if we could have the next slide, please. So our first point that we'd raise is requesting feedback throughout the inspection. So the reason we advise seeking people to ask questions and gain feedback is that often we've seen instances where clients come to say to us and they say, I don't understand, on the day it seemed to be going so well, and then following the inspection, the CQC inspector's tonality or feedback can drastically change. So it's important to keep a note on the day, which is often more positive, so you can use that against them should the tonality of it change. The second point we would advise is feel free to sit CQC inspectors down and present your service to them when they arrive. So if you have a registered manager who is confident enough, there is no reason why you cannot take charge of the inspection, sit the CQC inspectors down, and present your service to them as the starting point. Highlight the good things about your service and explain what the service provides and the typical residents you handle. It's almost like providing them a bit of context. And then the last point is staff interviews. So staff should have the confidence to deal with the questioning by the CQC inspectors and to challenge where necessary. So help prepare your staff for the CQC inspection. This means getting them ready, preparing them with some difficult questions, making them aware that the CQC will investigate into staff happiness, whether they're supported, whether they have enough training. They will be quizzed on maybe safeguarding policies or procedures, for example. So prepare staff, and especially the ones that are new to the service, who may not have experienced CQC inspection before. CQC inspector conduct can make staff feel hostile, and there's a bit of a nuance to the process. You want to balance maintaining relations with the CQC inspector. That does not mean that you cannot correct them if they are wrong. The CQC inspectors are just human beings. We all make mistakes. Just because they're a regulator does not mean they're perfect. That's far from it. If we could have the next slide, please. Some other key points is make sure you address any immediate compliance issues that arise. The CQC inspectors will raise this after the draft inspection report. Any compliance issues found should be rectified after. The reason we advise this is it can lead to possible further enforcement actions, such as action plans, warning notices, notices of proposal, notice of decision. It looks a lot better when a provider swiftly addressed the issues when they're first mentioned to them and highlighted. So make sure you understand the severity of it and take it seriously. The second point we have, ensure there's clarity about what additional information the CQC requires during the inspection. So get clarity exactly on what the CQC are asking for. Do not just assume what the CQC are referring for or asking for, and then send information that could potentially be wrong or not what they're asking for. You should always provide what is asked and nothing more. So make sure that you've got clarity on exactly what they want. So just don't trip yourselves up. And the third point really that we like to stress to all of our clients and people is that the evidence really is everything. So make sure your staff are trained and organised and they know where to get the evidence if they are asked for it. The CQC will be critical and allege that the evidence did not exist if it cannot be shown on the day of inspection. So they should always take this into account when you provide it at the factual accuracy stage, but sometimes it's not always done. So avoid this risk in total just by being organised, making sure that staff know where stuff are kept, and they can obtain the information easily. And lastly, ask if the CQC require further evidence or information. So this is just about being polite and courteous and try to be as helpful as possible. Ask if they require any further information. Make sure they're satisfied on the day and in the best possible way before they leave the service on the day of inspection. And we would also advise having somebody at your service taking detailed notes during the inspection. The focus on this notes really should be on any documents or additional information that the CQC ask from you. The last thing you want is getting a misunderstanding from a document that you can't find, and it will just help you sort of clear up any misconceptions about your service on the day if that's what a CQC inspector will ask for you. So it's easier to correct them on the day than it is after through the factual accuracy process. So if we could just have the next slide, and I'm going to pass back to my colleague Gemma.
Thanks, Lolly. So I'm covering post-inspection. So as you know, there's a feedback session after the inspection. What we would say is do not hesitate to make notes and to ask questions at that session. At the same time, maintain rapport with the CQC inspector, but do not be afraid to push back if necessary. You should also be given an initial feedback inspection summary, which should be linked to the 5 key questions or queries. So review this in detail, as it should indicate what to expect within the draft inspection report. It should give a summary of what has been found during the visit and identify any action that you need to take immediately. Both the feedback session and the initial feedback summary should reflect the content of the draft inspection report, but sometimes it doesn't, which further highlights the importance of taking notes and seeking clarification during the feedback session itself, as you may need to revisit your notes when compiling your factual accuracy response. Also ask for clarification about issues that you are unclear about. Don't make any assumptions about CQC's requests, as Ollie said. Always clarify exactly what they mean. You do not need to supply them with any more or additional information than what they are asking for, but do supply your additional evidence or information promptly and comprehensively. We would say don't provide simply raw data, provide narrative to explain the documents that you are providing. And if there is a good reason for any issues or gaps in the data, provide an explanation. On the next slide, if there are any issues about professionalism and conduct, so as I'd mentioned before about complaining to the CQC, you may want to lodge a complaint in relation to the professionalism and conduct of the inspector. However, note that if the CQC is taking enforcement action, your complaint will most likely be put on hold, so suspended, and this will remain suspended until the enforcement action ends. After the enforcement action has ended, they will proceed to investigate your complaint, but note that it could take many months. Also, be cautious about CQC inspectors. The point says, CQC inspectors are not a provider's friend. They are working in a professional role, and their duty is ultimately to scrutinise you if necessary. Remain courteous and polite, but be aware of them. They are your regulator, not your friend. Always remember, time is short, so act quickly, respond quickly and effectively. So I will hand you over to Oliver.
So I'm just going to talk to you guys about the factual accuracy process itself. So if we could just go to the next slide. So on the first point here, after the inspection, you'll receive a draft inspection report by email, and this is the start of the process. You will receive an email which will be sent to your registered manager or acting manager, or the person who has the contact details shared with the CQC, and a letter will be posted as well. So the important point to raise here, the second and main point here is there's a 10 working day count for you to submit your factual accuracy comments, and this begins the following day after you receive the email. It won't be on the date of the letter, it will be the day after you receive the email. The third point we have here as well is just the factual accuracy process. It allows you as the provider to identify and inform the CQC of any factual inaccuracies that they've made, which has contributed to a misunderstanding of your service or an opinion that's something that you don't agree with and you have evidence to contradict that. So do not be afraid of submitting strongly worded, robust factual accuracy comments. Correct the CQC when they are wrong, or if they've made false perceptions about the service that's not been underpinned by fact. And evidence really is crucial for your factual accuracy comments process. And then the last point here is that the evidence here and the additional information that you send has to have existed at the time of the inspection. So a crucial part of submitting your evidence is submitting evidence that existed at the time of inspection. If you rectify an issue after the inspection, you can include this for context, but please be aware that the CQC inspector will seek to rely on a snapshot of what they saw on the day. So it has to be evidence that related to what was in place at the time. If we could have the next slide, please. So inspection reports must be challenged within 10 working days. The timing is tight, and it's especially when you're juggling running the service as well. So please note that extensions are rare, so seek legal advice early as possible. If you cannot get the response time in 10 days, consider appointing solicitors who can help handle and run the process with you. It's worth mentioning that if you are working with solicitors, it's not just passing the responsibility on. Please note it will take time, work and some collaboration in order to come up with a robust response. So the factual accuracy comments process is the real opportunity to dispute allegations. If you do not challenge them, the CQC's allegations will become published and accepted as if they are the truth. So it's critical to really utilise the fact process. It's really best to do this from the offset. You don't really want this inaccuracy published as the truth, which gives some credit and legitimacy to the claim, and it makes it into an official draft inspection report. So you want to correct them and prevent that from happening, and that's why the factual accuracy process is so important. So if we could just go to the next slide, please. So there are certain rating limiters which, if they are present, they will cap your service, and that will stop you being rated anything higher than overall then requires improvement. So there are some examples of the rating limiters that are on screen. So you must have a registered manager, and you have to have steps taken to recruit one within a reasonable timescale. Another example can be a condition of its registration that's not being met. We have statutory notifications if they have not been submitted within good reason. We have the fourth point here as well. We have to sorry, some of my notes has gone there, Gemma, so I'm just going to slip to the next slide because I'm missing a couple of my notes.
Sure, no worries.
So if we could just go to the next slide, please. So I'll just talk about how to draft the Factual Accuracy Comments challenge. So the form can be accessed on the link that's on screen, and there are 3 main sections to the form. So if we just click to the next bit, there's a table showing what section for each. So the form will be perhaps unfamiliar to some of you that are attending here today. We're going to briefly run through the key things to consider. The main thing to consider is there are 4 sections to the form. They all serve a different purpose. So section A is really the least common section that you'll use, but it's to correct for any typographical errors that you can identify or incorrect job titles. Section B, this will be the main section of the Factual Accuracy Comments, and that's really where you're going to insert any information that's contributed to a negative judgment that you don't believe is correct, and that's when you'll support what you're saying with your evidence. It'll be the main bulk of your Factual Accuracy response. And then section C, that's really going to be like an additional information section. It's going to be anything that where you think that has been missed, and that would be relevant, especially when considering the judgment and overall rating of your service. If we could just go to the next slide, please. So the Factual Accuracy form will look like this. Most of you have seen this form, but some of you may not have, and be aware that sections need to be completed correctly. So if we could just go to the next circle that's going to pop up. This is information that you'll be able to find from your email or your letter provided by the CQC. The next circle that's just going to pop up here. You just want to select the section that you filled in. Sometimes you may be filling in all section A, B, and C. Sometimes it will most just be B or C. So just circle the ones that you've used. And then the next circle, this is just information that's going to be completed by whoever has done the Factual Accuracy Comments draft. So it's just, you know, the name, position, and date. It'll be of the staff member or the solicitor you've appointed that's helped. And then the last section here is do not fill this out. That's why we put the cross through it. This is just for CQC use only. If we could just go to the next slide, please. So what can be challenged and included in the Factual Accuracy response? We typically would sit down with a client and we would read out every single line from the draft inspection report that we've identified that's negative. And this is our starting point. So we would systematically work through these comments and take down detailed instructions from the provider, and we'd just find out whether they accept the comment made by the CQC or whether they reject it. We would challenge every comment which a provider feels is unfair or they do not agree with. And in instances where the provider agrees with the CQC assessment, it's important sometimes to not just accept it, but also explore the proportionality of that finding, explain any mitigating circumstances for it, and explain why this has occurred for context. This will not necessarily remove the allegation, but it certainly does help provide a bit of context to what's happened, and they may take that in. So I mentioned before, it's going to be a snapshot of what was in place at the time of the inspection. There's no limit to what you can challenge. So as I say, challenge everything that you find is negative that you don't agree with. And the last thing to reiterate is, yeah, it has to only be in relation to what was in place at the time of inspection. You can't fix a mistake that's made or an allegation, you can't address that after it's been raised by the CQC within that 10-day period and then submit that. It's going to have to be a snapshot of what they saw the day. So if we could just go to the next slide, please. So this is actually what a factual accuracy challenge form will look like. So if you just go to the next bit on this, you will only want to fill in the circled areas in red here. So they're the two main sections for each, and you just fill them out and you ignore the grey sections. That's for CQC use only. If we can just go to the next slide, please.
Thanks, Oliver. So in terms of the factual accuracy response, as Oliver said, evidence is everything. Evidence is crucial. The strength of your factual accuracy comment submission is dependent on the evidence that you submit. So you could actually be submitting quite a lot of evidence. It can range from audits, newsletters, meeting minutes, photos, as well as copies of your electronic records. But be aware the CQC will scrutinise and possibly use your evidence against you. So what you need to do is check for red flags in documentation that you are sending. So check for any dates, any out-of-date training certificates, for example, care plans which reveal adverse information, for example, falls or missing care signatures. Do scrutinise the evidence that you are providing and make sure that it is wholesome. Also note that if CQC has made an allegation on the day of the inspection and you as a provider, you rectify this after the inspection and you submit evidence of having addressed the issue, CQC may mention the rectification in the inspection report, but it's unlikely that it will have an effect on the allegation itself that's made against you or the rating that's applied. And as we've said, that's because the CQC is primarily focused on what they found on the day of inspection. Next slide, please. Also, it's worth considering requesting the inspection notes. So these are the notes that the inspector actually produced whilst on the site visit. We have had success in the past in getting these, but it is increasingly difficult to obtain them. The notes do form part of the underlying evidence, so it's worth trying to get a hold of them if you can. Also, request a service user and staff key. So these are two different things. The service user key, request that if you have trouble identifying the service users that are referred to in the inspection report. The staff key may be necessary, but we are seeing that the CQC are reluctant to provide this in order to protect staff anonymity. But again, it's worth a try trying to obtain those. Then on the next slide, this is literally just to illustrate why factual accuracy comments are important. This is the type of result that you'd be seeking. As you can see with the top example, you've got the overall rating as requires improvement. And I'm just reflecting back on what Oliver was talking about in terms of rating limiters. So he didn't have his notes, but just to say that in terms of the overall rating, if there's a regulatory breach, this is a rating limiter for the overall rating. And then as you can see with the top example, you've got the service, whether the service is well led. So if a provider has not returned their PIR information on time, that's a rating limiter for the well-led domain. So basically, you will not be able to achieve more than requires improvement for the well-led domain if you don't return your PIR, and you will not be able to obtain more than requires improvement for your overall rating if there's a breach of regulation. So moving on to the next slide, please. So in terms of after the factual accuracy process, also thinking about if there's any enforcement action that's also being undertaken. So the CQC may be taking enforcement action against you at the same time as you submitting factual accuracy comments. That you may also be submitting representations against warning notices, for example, or a notice of proposal to cancel, suspend your service or to impose conditions on your service. or the inspection could have taken place whilst you were appealing a notice of decision. So this would be during the tribunal proceedings. So essentially, factual accuracy comments may not be the only thing that you are dealing with. So it is worth seeking support and advice to assist. Next slide, please. So after submitting your factual accuracy response, essentially you just need to await the CQC. This can take a considerable amount of time. Just as an example, a client of mine has experienced a wait of just over 6 months, so you may need to be patient. Also, consider submitting a rating review. A request for a rating review is submitted on a web form, and that needs to be submitted within 15 working days of the report being published. The only grounds for requesting a review are that the inspector did not follow the process for making ratings decisions and aggregating them. So it's quite a narrow ground for requesting a review. So there is limited success with this, but it is worth a try. Also consider the merits of making a complaint if necessary, as we've mentioned. So examples of what you can complain about include when you think that the CQC has made an administrative mistake, such as providing wrong information or taking longer than it said it would do to do something. If an inspector has behaved in an unprofessional way or not followed its policies and procedures. Now, there is no set timescale for the CQC to deal with complaints. It can take many months to receive a response from them. And as said, the CQC is most likely to suspend investigating the complaint if there is ongoing enforcement action. There is also limited success with making complaints we've seen, in the sense that the CQC tend to back their own inspectors and seem to be incapable of being objective. So thanks for listening to this portion. What we're going to do is run through some exercises. So hopefully you've remembered some of the main points that we've covered. So Oliver will take you through the exercises now.
Thanks, Gemma. So this is going to be our little interactive element. It's just a short interactive segment. Do not worry, it's not a test. It's just an exercise and a task to give you a little bit of a break from just listening to me and Gemma's voices. And this, in essence, is just going to teach you how and what will spring immediately up to us at Ridouts when we review inspection reports. It's just going to be a short collection of red flags that we as a team of lawyers would identify and push back on when we review. These are the sorts of examples of things that we would typically see and what we feel like people should be aware of if they're going to deal with the CQC. So we're informally discussing as a group the things that we would like to identify in our Factual Accuracy challenge. Probably the easiest way for this to work is just to chuck in your responses in the chat or the Q&A function. So just to recap, in this fictional scenario, me and Gemma form Brown and Nicholas Limited, and we have a care home called ABC Care. We have an inspection from the CQC, and the following slide is going to be a short little snippet of that draft inspection report. We're a large residential care home of 80 service users. So as you can see here in the draft inspection report, in the save domain, you can see that we have a requires improvement and there's criticisms in the 2 bullet points that have amounted to a breach of regulation 12. So the task here is just to identify the sort of things you pick up on or push back on here with the CQC. So the aim would be to pick up on any faults and remove the breach. So just remember, in this scenario, it's a large residential care home of 80 service users. So it's just an open question to everybody here that's a participant today. It's just what sort of things would you identify in that maybe you would raise if you were conducting a factual accuracy challenge. So I'll just give you a little bit of time just to read it and to chat anything that note anything that you've seen. It's a good question someone has raised as they would like to know what files were seen and reviewed. Yeah, the volume of care records is a really good point. I mean, that's crucial. We'll get onto that on the next slide, but well done. That's spot on. So if we just go to the next slide, I'll highlight some points that's been raised. So the first thing that would jump out to all of us is if only 4 care records had been reviewed by the CQC in this fictional scenario, if we had 80 people, that's a really small sample size. Typically, the CQC should be looking at a sample size of about 10%. So if there's a 80 people here in this scenario, we would want to see at least 8. It should be at least 10%. Also, if we go to the next bullet point or the next circle, if only 10 people were supported by medicines, and we can go to the next circle and the one after as well, and only one person had missing information recorded, we would raise proportionality. It's only 1 in 10. And we'd also raise the aspect of the NICE guidance. So we see, typically we've seen here at Ridouts, the CQC will sort of treat the NICE guidance as it's law. Sometimes the CQC just need to be pushed back on and reminded of its status, that it's guidance, it's best practice. So obviously try and follow it, but not following that is not a breach of a law or regulation. So that's what would typically jump out to us at Ridouts. So if we can just move out to the next one. So there'll be a question on screen here that is what evidence would we like to submit to the CQC to show that the below snippet is not a fair representation of the service. So obviously that bullet point there is critical of the service. Which is sort of an open question to everyone here as participants today. What sort of things that would you think of that you would like to raise? So in essence, if we go to the next circle here, the key behind this negative comment is that staff do not feel supported. So I guess the question really would be, what sort of things as a provider could you demonstrate to show that staff are supporting that this is wrong? I'm just going to click on and have a little look. Staff surveys, yeah. Rotas and timesheets have the actual evidence of the hours worked. Yeah, that's another good point. Yeah, so I've got a lot of good answers. If we could just go to the next slide, and I'll choose that we've got what we had selected as well, but there's some really good answers coming in here. So the evidence that would jump out to us and that we would like to submit, obviously some of you guys have raised this already, is the staff rotas themselves. Second point would be evidence of staff appraisals and development chats, sort of one-to-one chats. Basically, this would evidence that staff are being supported. Staff can raise issues with management. There is effective monitoring of staff. The CQC will want to see evidence of a structured appraisal system. So these are the sort of things that you'd be wanting to raise. Another one would be meeting minutes from internal staff meetings. This shows communication, the culture of the service, the building, the moral building of this. And lastly, staff surveys. This will show, again, the culture. It shows that if anyone is unhappy, and they can raise this and it can be dealt with. So yeah, there's some really good answers filling in for the Q&A section. So thanks to everyone that's participating. That's spot on. If we could just go to the next exercise. So this is an example of the well-led section of a draft inspection report. And what I'm going to do here in this exercise is just show how mixed a draft inspection report could be. We're going to underline in red and underline in green. As simple as that. Just so in green a positive comment, underline in red a negative comment, and it just shows how mixed a draft inspection report could be. One of the things we do here at Ridouts, and why we would do this, is we examine the draft inspection report, including the overall summary in the background section, all of the domain sections, and we just highlight in green anything we found that's positive and highlight in red anything that we think is negative. And the reason we do this is that anything we find that's positive can be used in accordance with the CLOEs, and anything negative we would likely include in section B of the draft inspection report, and we would challenge that. So if we just go to the next slide, please, or yeah, so one by one here, it's just going to filter down and show you guys the negative or the positive comments here. And I would advise this be a good starting point to anyone that's thinking of doing a factual accuracy comments process on their own. First point that you should do is just read it through and just highlight positive and negative comments. So if we just go to the next slide. So the reason we would do this is so we could relate some of the stuff back to the queries. The queries can be accessed on the link that's on screen, and we would create what we call Ridouts a ratings characteristics table. So the queries are guidance, and this is what you are judged upon, and this helps CQC inspectors grade your service. However, this criteria can be used against them in certain situations, and this includes making a ratings characteristics table. So if you have a draft inspection report that is mostly positive, but you still rated requires improvement overall, then you would look to get one in this situation. You would look to highlight the positive things and ask why your rating isn't rated good. So you would take references from the good queries and you would put them in. So in essence, the key point to remember is you will always be choosing references to queries of the rating that you aspire to be. So if you are inadequate, you would choose requires improvement, the next one up. If you requires improvement, you would choose good. And if you are good and you think that you should have been excellent, then you could look for that as well. The second point is the real positives and the merits for doing a ratings characteristics table is that it can highlight to the CQC inspector with their own guidance that the rating they've given is unfair. And Ridouts typically depend on the size of the table. We would either, you could insert this table into your section C of your fact form, or you could put this as an appendix to your evidence. So it's sort of a stylistic preference form, depending on the size and how big it is. But yeah, we'll just go to the next slide and I'll talk you through how you can do this effectively. This is a screenshot of one of the queries. So the first circle here, obviously if the domains in well-led, go to the well-led of the query. The next step is you're going to want to identify the appropriate characteristic. Essentially what this is the most relevant comment. So if there is a comment in the draft inspection report that's positive about having a clear vision, then you would come to this section here, W1, and you'd look at the clear vision. And then the third circle, this is the point we're raising here about which one would you choose from. So if you had a requires improvement, you would be looking at the good boxes and you'd be choosing comments from the good box. And then the last circle, you would just include any comment that seems most similar to the positive one that you had in your draft inspection report. So you'd pull it out, you'd use the queries, and you'd be asking the question essentially, why wouldn't you be rated higher? Because this is the guidance of how you're rating the service, and this is a positive comment that matches that. So that's going to be the end of that exercise as well. That's just showing you how to do a ratings characteristics table. If we can just go to the next slide. So Gemma, we've come to the end of the exercises.
Thank you.
We've got time to do the polls if you'd like to do them.
We do, yeah. So this will test your knowledge on what we've been talking about. So we've got a couple of poll questions. So I think it should have just popped up on your screen. So Ollie will ask you the first question, and we'll take it alternately. Thank you.
Okay. So just to explain in context for the people and the participants in here, this is an anonymous poll. We don't know people's names. It's not a quiz. It doesn't matter if you get it wrong or right. But it's just to recap some of the information, the key pieces of information that we've explained in the first half of this webinar. So there's a multiple choice question. If you receive a draft inspection report by email on the 29th of March, when will the deadline for the factual accuracy comments be? So if people could just select their answers.
Thank you. It's coming in. Thank you, guys. Yeah, a lot of people are answering.
Okay, I can't see the answer. Oh, here we go.
Okay.
So we'll just quickly recap from so A being the 8th of April wouldn't be the correct answer, and that's just because the 10 working days does not include weekends. It doesn't start immediately from the date that you've received. It's the first day will be the following day after you receive it by the email, not the letter date. B would be wrong because the count starts the next working day, and it's a 10-day count. That would have included weekends, which would have been wrong. So C is actually the correct answer, the 14th of April 2023. And 9
That's the lowest score, isn't it?
It was, yeah.
But the reason, I think, is on the next slide.
Yeah, so that just will explain it on the next slide. Although we've got a typo there, it says the 13th of April, which should be the 14th. But yeah, so that will break it down for people and explain how you would get to that.
Yeah, so I suppose a kind of a trick question, because with this you had Good Friday and Easter Monday.
So yeah, it's probably a bad example of bank holidays. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, got you thinking.
If we could go to the next poll then.
Okay, so yeah, this one is, which one of the following is not a rating limiter? So we've talked about that quite a lot. Okay, just give it a couple minutes. Okay. So we've got quite a lot of answers. We've got answers for each, A, B, C, and D. So the correct answer is D, which the majority have got right. So D is not a rating limiter. A and C are rating limiters for well-led. So if they occur, as we said, the well-led cannot be higher than requires improvement. B is actually an overall rating limiter. So if there's a breach of regulation, the overall rating cannot be higher than requires improvement. Thank you. Thanks for answering that. Okay, next one.
We'll just go to the next one then. So if you were to receive a draft inspection report and you notice the inspectors failed to consider a key piece of information that you know that you've showed them, what section in the factual accuracy form would you mention this? I can't see the answers, Gemma. Have you?
Yeah, so we've got quite a few that have answered, about 33. Okay. And we've got the highest scoring is section B. That's the highest.
So that is the correct answer. So we're on a roll here. So section B, as I mentioned earlier, that is the main section of your factual accuracy form. If there's a key piece of information which you know you've showed them, this is where you would insert this. In section B, you'd attach it as evidence again. And yeah, this is the category that would fall into. So well done, guys, for getting that right. Just go to the next question, please.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is, which one of the following is the approach that the CQC adopts during an inspection? I'll give you a couple of minutes because there's quite a few responses. So this one is a bit of a trick question. I'll give you the answer. So it's actually none of the above, because none of them are an exact true answer. So just to explain, In terms of CQC's overall approach and how they consider inspections and what that results in terms of an inspection report, the CQC, the first option, CQC only considers what was in place at the time of the inspection. But this actually highlights what is meant by the duration of an inspection. So the inspection can include a site visit and also remotely receiving documents. The CQC are increasingly noting rectifications and evidence of rectifications shown after the inspection. So it's worth noting, obviously, as we've said, that rectifications can be taken into account, but how much weight is given to them it is not always consistent. Also, B, CQC will consider everything shown to them prior to publishing the final inspection report. So the CQC may consider further information provided prior to publishing the final inspection report. So this could be through your factual accuracy, but they can equally ignore this information. So again, as noted, in terms of rectifications, it may not affect your rating itself or the allegations. Also, whether CQC will consider all evidence and information sent to them because they judge the service in its most recent position. This is slightly the same as the other two, but what it reflects on is that the CQC, they aim in the future to be able to have an up-to-date picture of the service, but they're not currently in that position. And then the last one there, about CQC only considering information sent in the PIR. So no one responded to that, which is good. But as you know, it's not only PIR information that the CQC considers. But essentially, this highlights that all your interactions with the CQC, emails, etc., but also obviously evidence and information that you're providing before in your PIR and during and after the inspection are important. So just be aware, be on your guard and be cautious and give explanations as well for everything that you're providing them with. Okay, next question.
So this is the last one, and sorry, move that. Which of the following options would be valid grounds for a complaint regarding a CQC inspector? So my notes have actually disappeared again for this one, Gemma, but I can answer it, or I think I know. So I'll just let people select the answer. So it's essentially which one of the following is a valid grounds for a complaint regarding a CQC inspector. Have people voted, Gemma?
People have voted, yes, and okay. Majority have got it right.
Okay, yeah, perfect. So yeah, that is the correct answer, C. Basically, complaints, a key part of a complaint is if a CQC inspector hasn't followed their policy or procedures and if they made administrative mistakes along the way. Also, if they behave in a professional manner, that will form part of it as well. But yeah, that's the correct answer. So well done, everyone. Most of those were selected. The most popular answer was usually the correct answer, so that's good.
That's great. Just to add, Ollie, someone or maybe a couple of people selected D, but that's a good point in terms of after the factual accuracy process ended, you notice that evidence relied on by the CQC inspector is still incorrect. And what you've got to also be careful of in terms of complaints is if you are referring directly to evidence and the factual accuracy process, the complaints team will say that you've had your opportunity or you have your opportunity to deal with it in terms of factual accuracy, and it's not part of their complaints process. So just be wary of that. You can have a bit of a battle with the complaints team as to what they cover and should deal with.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thanks for that, Gemma. So I think the next slide is the Q&A slide. Is that?
That's right. Yeah. So thanks a lot for listening to us. We just wanted to give you an opportunity to ask any questions. We've got 5 minutes left. So use the Q&A function if you've got any questions on anything that we've covered. We'll give you a couple of minutes. See if anything comes up. Whilst we're waiting for any questions to trickle in, just to remind you that we will be sharing the slides and the recording after this session. If you have any questions that pop up afterwards, do not be, feel free to contact us directly. So our contact information is on the next slide, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. So again, thank you. Thanks for your attendance today. Thanks for listening to us. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you. I think we've got a hand raised. Yeah.
Have you seen that question, Gemma, or do you want me to read it?
I have. I think we're still online. The inspectors appear to be basing evidence on their own views. Yeah. So, I mean, what we'll do is we'll take these questions, because we've still got 3 minutes, but we will take these questions and we can send them out in a circular, can't we, Ollie?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, we can quickly get through them now if you want.
We've still got a few participants. So the first question we've got is: increasingly inspectors appear to be basing evidence on their own views. An example of this is how medications are stored. And again, I think it's about them being able to evidence their allegations. So it's putting CQC on the spot in terms of your factual accuracy comment, and the CQC being able to rely on any law to begin with, but any guidance, any relevant guidance. And then the next question is: what is the probability that CQC will change the rating? And that's very difficult. Very difficult.
Essentially, how long is a piece of string? It's all on the evidence. That's the one thing I will emphasize to that is it ranges case to case. It depends on the evidence. That's the key thing. If you've got lots of evidence to support your position, yeah, the rating can change. If you don't have as much evidence, it will be hard to get the rating to change.
I mean, as we said, evidence is key, and be thorough, be robust in your response, and that just gives you the best chance. The next question: the PIR had been removed as they moved to the new strategy and quality statements along with risk-based inspections. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of changes happening. Definitely. The CQC are rolling out a number of webinars, which they record and they put on their YouTube channel. So I'd say keep up to date with those just to see how things are changing. And the CQC have admitted recently that they are kind of seeing how things go as things go along, really. So things will develop over the next year.
And also, I don't know if we've got time, we've got Angela who's raised sort of like a recent experience, and that might be a good one to touch on.
Did you want to do that one, Ollie?
No, I'll ask you for this one, I think, because
we had a recent inspection and did not receive feedback until 1 week later by Teams with the lead inspector, at which point we then had to confirm by email that we were satisfied with the feedback. Sorry. Okay. Yes. So yeah, no, completely understand. And that's the point about the feedback session itself. I mean, it should be after the inspection, and ideally, if they come in and there's a site visit, and your inspection is just that site visit, it should be after. So on the same day, and face to face, ideally. But with the CQC moving to having site visits and then also seeking information afterwards, you can end up having a Teams meeting. The importance of taking notes, just so if you're taking notes during your inspection as well as during this feedback session, you can hopefully see that things are joined up in terms of your response that you receive from the CQC. But it's not necessarily a satisfactory approach that they are taking, but it shows that you just need to be alert and keep your records as well. In terms of you confirming whether you are satisfied with the feedback, realise this is not part of your factual accuracy process at all. And if you are not satisfied, you can say, don't feel pushed to give a positive response. But at the same time, just take on board what's been said, and you can then use that as well in terms of your factual accuracy response. But don't be forced to give a positive response to them seeking feedback from you. Okay, so
Thanks for
I
that.
think we've got 2 more because we're running just slightly over. Same happened to us. It's just
yeah, it's just shocking how so many people have all experienced that, really. There weren't really questions. There were also people just saying it's also happened to them as well. So it's probably a good topic to have discussed.
Yeah, it seems like it's another hot topic that we should take note of as well as a firm.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Again, thanks for listening. Thanks to those who remained on to the very end and provided us with additional questions. That's great. And as we've said, you've got our contact details, so do get in contact if you need to speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and thanks for participating.